Welcome to the third phase of the IT project management life cycle, the planning phase. In this video, we will go through the major activities and the deliverables involved in project planning. Let's start by having an overview of this phase. The planning phase is the third phase of the IT project management life cycle. It begins after the project is initiated. In the planning phase, various planning activities will be conducted, which includes the planning of work, schedule, budget, resources, staffing need, and etc. Those planning activities are performed to ensure the project will be completed on time and within budget. Throughout this phase, planning activities will be performed, and a set of planned documents will be output. Projects being planned progresses to the execution and control phase of the life cycle. Let's have a look at the activities and deliverables of this phase. The first activity is to set expectations with the team by conducting a kickoff meeting with all the participants of this phase. After that, a bunch of planning activities will be performed. We will go through each of them in a minute. The results of planning will be documented with a set of deliverables. Let's go through the major activities now. Conduct planning kickoff meeting. Before you start any actual planning, a kickoff meeting will be conducted with all the participants of this phase to set expectations, articulate likely risks, and clarify uncertainties the project team may have. Here is the agenda items of a typical planning kickoff meeting. A brief introduction of the project team and the parties that are involved in the project. Describe their roles and responsibilities in brief. Make sure everyone is clear about the start and end dates of the planning phase. Set the rules and guidelines for the planning phase. For example, it's expected that project manager must be involved in any formal and informal meetings with stakeholders. Study and discuss the elements in the project charter. Make sure everyone is clear about the project's vision, major milestones, and etc. Discuss the overall project approach and stress the importance of planning activities schedule. Depending on the length of this part and the need of non-project team stakeholders' involvement, this part can be split into a separate meeting. Discuss any likely risks identified and may happen in this phase, and let the team know about the resolution strategies. Let's say if it's a risk that severe weather condition may impact the progress of planning activities, then the impacts foreseeable at this point as well as the job arrangement should be discussed. Besides risks, it is important to make sure all participants are clear about the constraints and assumptions of project planning. Describe project resources and how to access them. Discuss the resources and tools needed to complete this phase and this project. If necessary, let the team know about how these resources can be acquired. Q&A. Finally, answer any questions that the participants may have. Define project activities using work breakdown structure. The first planning activity is to define project activities using a work breakdown structure. The purpose of this activity is to establish a common understanding of project scope. This is a sample work breakdown structure. It is a hierarchical description of the work that must be done to complete the deliverables of a project. The root element is the context element, which is typically the name of the project. Each descending level in the work breakdown structure represents an increasingly detailed description of the project activities. Generally speaking, there are three typical ways in structuring works with a work breakdown structure. They include phase-based structures, deliverable-based structures, and responsibility-based structures, which define the project activities based on the project phases, the deliverables agreed to deliver, and the organization units that will work on the project respectively. The development of work breakdown structure involves subdividing the major project activities or sub-activities into smaller, more manageable activities until the activities are defined in sufficient detail to support the management and development of project works. The items at the lowest level of a branch are known as work packages. schedule activities. The scheduling of activities involves identifying the schedule of each work package as identified in the previous activity and their interdependencies using a PERT chart. A PERT chart stands for Program Evaluation Review Technique, which helps you create workflows, milestones, schedules, timetables, critical paths, and other planning requirements for a project. The connections between tasks represent their dependencies. For each task in a PERT chart, specify the task name, which is the name of the work package by default, an ID that identifies the task uniquely. The planned start and finish date of the task. Note that a task can only be started if the depending task is completed. In other words, the start date of a task must be greater than the finish date of all the depending tasks. The duration, which is the number of days between the start and end date, and the person who are responsible for this task. Project manager can use the schedule to plan and implement project tasks and to monitor the progress of the project. Perform resource planning. Resource planning involves determining the type and amount of resources needed to complete the project. An early estimation of resource needs was provided when developing the project charter in the initiation phase. In this phase, you have to provide a detailed breakdown of resources. Typical resources may include material, facility, equipment, and hardware, software, and so on. Staffing resources will be planned in the next activity, so you may skip it here. For each of the identified resource, describe the following attributes. The amount and the quality needed. Say if printer is a resource required, how many printers do you need? Is there any specific feature required, such as color printing, print in double size, etc.? The status of allocation. Was the resource allocated? Was it reserved or just planned? The project activities that have such resource need. The time duration which the resource will be consumed. The planned date and time when the resource will be allocated. The cost of purchasing and renting this resource. Whether the cost is per hour, per day, per month, or any other units. The level of risk of not being able to acquire this resource as planned. Perform staffing planning. Staffing plan is sometimes known as human resources plan. The purpose of the staffing plan is to achieve project success by ensuring the appropriate human resources with the necessary skills are acquired. Part of this activity involves identifying the roles and responsibilities of project stakeholders. Some of the project stakeholders were identified when developing the project charter. In this phase, you have to include the roles for project team members. Programmer, quality manager, and UX specialist are some typical project team member roles. Once the stakeholder roles are identified, present their responsibilities as they relate to project tasks using a RACI matrix. In the matrix, project stakeholders are listed as roles, while the work packages identified when developing the work breakdown structure are listed as columns. You are required to mark the roles of different project roles. Here are the 4 kinds of roles and responsibilities. R means that a role is responsible for completing the work. A stands for accountable. Stakeholders who take this role will ensure the completion and sign-off of a task or its related documents. C stands for consulted. Stakeholders who are consulted for decisions. I stands for informed. Stakeholders who will be informed of any critical change or when an action or decision has been made. Perform budget planning. Budget planning involves summarizing the expenditures and source of funding for the project during the life of the project by providing an expense or cost breakdown for each work package by fiscal year. Here is an example. The work package conduct planning blah 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 incurs a cost for facility, and the cost in the first fiscal year is $300, so forth. Perform project performance planning. A set of business objectives have been identified in the initiation phase when developing the project's charter. In this activity, you have to identify the performance goal for each of them. Performance goals are the performance standards to achieve. They help you know what is expected by the end user. To be effective, it is important that they are clearly defined and easy to measure. An unclear, chaotic list of goals can lead a project to a failure. In project management, the acronym SMART is used to assist people in thinking and validating performance goals. Setting SMART goals is an important part of performance planning. So what does the acronym SMART represent? It represents 5 qualities your goals should have. They are specific. Good goals are well written and focused. Measurable. There are concrete criteria for measuring progress of goal completion. Attainable. Set realistic goals. Don't set goals that are too difficult to achieve or beyond the team's capabilities. If such a goal is proposed by the user and cannot be changed, you may need to assess the other part of the planning, such as the staffing plan, to see if the goal can be made attainable with more resource inputs. Relevant. Make sure the goals are relevant to the business objective. Time-based, or sometimes called time-bound. Make sure a goal has a deadline defined. Let's go through an example and see how goals can be created in a smart way. In this example, we have a business objective: improve customer satisfaction. 3 performance goals have been identified for this objective. The first one is that the shop page must be equally displayed in various web browsers. The second one is to have the daily view count of the shop page increased by 20%. The third one is to complete the feature Add Item to Cart by noon 13th of August 2017. So are there any specific goals? Yes, the first one. It clearly states the browser types as well as the versions that need to have the page displayed properly. A poor version of this goal would be just to support multiple browsers. No one knows which browser to support and for what versions. Second one, measurable. The second goal is measurable. It requires that the daily view count has to increase by 20%. So if the increment is just 90%, it's not qualified. If the view increased by 20% per month, it's not qualified either. A poor example is not to indicate the amount of improvement required to achieve. Attainable. Again, the second goal asks for only a 20% improvement, which is a goal that can be achieved by the team. The poor example would be to aim for 500% improvement. Well, we can't really say aiming for 500% improvement is unrealistic, because whether it is unrealistic or not depends on many factors, such as the resources available, the time allowed, and etc. Just keep in mind that the goal must be set by considering the team's capability and other related factors. Relevant. All the 3 goals are defined to serve the business objective in this example, so all of them are relevant. A poor example goal is to have the search ranking of the shop page increase by 10%. It's poor because it's not relevant to the objective to improve customer satisfaction. Finally, time-based. The third performance goal has set a deadline, so it's time-based. A poor example is to have a feature completed before interim meeting. It has no deadline defined. And what if the time of meeting changed or even cancelled? If a goal requires achieving something at a specific time, make sure the time is stated clearly to avoid any uncertainties and conflicts. Besides setting performance goals, part of this activity involves detailing the acceptance criteria for each deliverable. In Project Charter, a list of final deliverables have been identified, which can be software products, systems, major functions, and processes. In this plan, you are required to specify the acceptance criteria for these deliverables. This includes providing a detailed description on the deliverable, stating the planned time of completion, and most important, describe the acceptance criteria that will be used to determine or judge the completion of a deliverable. Perform risk management planning. Risks have negative impacts to a project. Therefore, it is important to take appropriate measures to identify, mitigate, manage, and control them. Risk management planning is to identify and detail these aspects. Here are the risk management activities to be planned. Identification. Describe the process by which the risks will be identified. It should include the methods the project team will take to identify risks and the way and format in which risks will be recorded. Prioritization and categorization. Explain how risks are quantified and prioritized. Once risks are identified, it is important to evaluate the probability and impact of each risk in order to prioritize the risk and plan the mitigation strategy. Risks which are more likely to occur and have a significant impact on the project will be the highest priority risks. Response planning. Describe how the project team will respond to each identified risk. Monitoring, controlling, and reporting. Describe how the risks in the project will be monitored. It is important to ensure that risk monitoring is continuous throughout the life cycle of the project, and the trigger conditions for each risk are identified. Identify and record project risks. Identify project risks by following the risk management approach described under the risk management plan. Information of each identified risk is stored in risk register. The risk register is a log of all identified risks. It shows the probability and impact of the risks to the project, mitigation strategy, and when the risk is estimated to occur. The risk register is created in the planning phase of the project and be updated in the execution and control phase with the risks identified during the execution of project activities. Let's take a look at the elements of risk register. Affected work packages. The work package elements that will be affected if the risk occurs. Probability. The likelihood that a risk or opportunity will occur, on a scale from 0 to 10 with 10 being the highest. Impact. The impact of the risk on the project if it occurs, scale from 0 to 10 with 10 being the highest. Risk score. Determined by multiplying probability and impact. Risk management approach or mitigation actions. The action which is to be taken if the risk occurs. Early warning signs or trigger. Something which indicates that a risk is about to occur or has already occurred. Risk owner. The person who the project manager assigns to watch for triggers and manage the risk response if the risk occurs. Date of last update. The date the particular log of risk was last reviewed and updated. Perform change and configuration management planning. Change management is an important part of project management. Changes must be vetted and managed to ensure that they are within the project scope and are communicated to all stakeholders. This activity involves the identification of project components that are governed by the change control process and the documentation of change process. There are two primary concepts in change and configuration management planning: change control and configuration management control. Although they both are concerned with management of change, they are distinct activities and have different focuses. Here is a description of the two concepts. Change control is the process of identifying, documenting, approving or rejecting, and controlling changes to the change control items, which typically include the scope, schedule, budget, and performance plans. In other words, change control manages changes to the project baseline. Configuration management control is the process of managing the changes of the final project deliverables and related documents throughout the life cycle of the project. In short, change control focuses on project change, whereas configuration management control focuses on product change. Here is a business process diagram that visualizes the change control process. It starts from a change request submission, followed by a reviewing, discussion, and voting process, and then approval, and finally ends by managing changes. Perform procurement planning. Procurement planning involves identifying how project needs can best be fulfilled by procuring products and services outside. It involves describing how the various aspects of procurement will be managed from the beginning to the end of the project. Documentation procedure. Describe how project procurement decision will be documented. Conduction of procurement. Describe the necessary steps and responsibilities for procurement during the course of the project. Vendor management. Describe the roles and actions the project team and purchasing and contracts department will take to ensure that the selected vendors provide all of the products and services agreed upon and that the appropriate levels of quality are maintained. Perform communications planning. In project management, communication is the way to deliver information needed by someone. Different project stakeholders have different information needs. For example, the executive sponsor may want to know about how the project is going. It is important for communications to be performed smoothly so that the information can be delivered to stakeholders as needed. In order for the project members, customers, and other stakeholders to have the information they need to achieve their duties and to manage stakeholders' expectation about how the project is progressing, it is important to document the information needs and the way to deliver the information. It consists of 3 main steps. The first step is to identify the information needs of stakeholders. Determine the people and target group that need to receive a particular kind of information. State the information needs. Next, identify how information is reported. For each information need identified in step 1, identify the purpose of such need, the provider of the information, when and how it is collected, and how the information will be reported. Finally, determine the delivery vehicle. For each report or document needed to communicate information, identify the methods for delivering the report or document. Typical examples include email, verbal, conference call, meeting, written memo, newsletter, website, formal presentation, and status report. Specify the frequency of distribution for each report or document. Perform quality management and IV&V planning. This activity involves the planning of product and project-related quality assurance activities. It's divided into 3 parts. The first one, identify the planning of product-related quality assurance activities. Define the in-process control plans, which address quality control areas. The second one, identify the planning of project-related quality assurance activities. Determine how often the project plan will be reviewed to check for task slippage and any impact on dependencies. Finally, if appropriate, identify the planning of independent verification and validation activities to be performed. The activities are described as independent because they will be performed by a disinterested third party. Develop project plan. The project plan document is simply a combination of individual planning documents obtained by performing the planning activities in this phase. Make sure the project plan document is approved by the approving authority in order to continue to the next phase. Before we carry on, let's have a quick summary of the planning phase. You've learned the objective of the planning phase, which is to clearly plan the project and develop a set of plans to guide the project team through the implementation and closure of the project. The core activities involve conducting a planning kickoff meeting to set expectations, articulate likely risks, and clarify uncertainties the project team may have, and various project planning activities, which help you manage and control schedule, cost, quality, changes, risk, procurement, and etc. This ends the planning phase. The next phase, the execution and control phase, is where the project team get the work done. See you again in the next video. Goodbye.